Welcome back in, guys, to Rover Sports. And this is the second installation of a video that I'm making tonight. And this video is me ranking the top 4 coaches in the NFC East. It's kind of a fun exercise as we head into June. I guess it's unbelievable, actually. I thought it was mid-June, but it's still late May. For some reason, I thought it was June. But the point is that we're getting closer to the NFL season. The point is that we're going to be doing a lot of videos on coaches. We're going to be doing a lot of videos on coaches and on rankings. So without any further ado, let's get into ranking the NFC East pound for pound. Which coach is the best? Which coach is towards the bottom of the NFC East? I'm going to lay out to you exactly what I think is going to happen from these coaches in the NFC East, okay? So I'm going to rank them from worst to first. And this is going to surprise a lot of people maybe, but I'm going to put at number 4, I'm going to put Riverboat Ron Rivera as the 4th best coach in the NFC East. Now, Ron Rivera has the toughest job, being that he is now the head coach of the Washington Redskins. The Redskins haven't won a playoff game in maybe 25 years. So the Redskins, it's a very tough job with Dan Snyder there at the helm. They don't really have a quarterback in Washington. Their defense is combined of overpaid guys like Landon Collins. They don't really have a lot of elite linebackers. In the middle, they have Daron Payne, and they also have, you now add a Chase Young. But again, this roster is nowhere near completion. But the reason why I put Rivera on this list is I don't think Rivera is a terrible coach. I just think he's kind of a retread hire. I'm not psyched about Ron Rivera. He had one tremendous year with the Carolina Panthers. I think that he's a very, very average head football coach in the NFL. I think he's right towards that average in terms of how innovative he is on offense. It's going to be North Turner's son that is going to be running the offense there in Washington, D.C., and I'm just not enthused about the Ron Rivera hire. I even think Kevin O'Connell would have been a more exciting hire. You look at Shane Waldron possibly, Kellen Moore, Joe Brady. There are certain names out there that are more exciting than a Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera is an okay football coach. This is a very competitive division in terms of these head coaches. So that's why Ron Rivera is my 4th rated head coach. And what I'm doing here is I'm also projecting for the future. I believe that the Washington Redskins for the next 4 years, I would be stunned if they won a playoff game in the next 4 years. I would even be surprised if they made the playoffs in the next 4 years. So I'm projecting 5 years down the line. That's what I'm doing with this video, is I'm projecting. This is not based on past accomplishments, because then Joe Judge would automatically be in the 4th spot. This is projecting. This is making a prediction. This is making making a prediction on terms of the head coaches in the NFC East, and we'll see how this video does over time. We'll see how accurate I can be over time. Number 3 on this list, again, going to surprise people, but I'm actually going to put the Super Bowl champion of 2017, Doug Peterson, as the coach that is in the 3rd slot. Now I know the arguments. He won a Super Bowl already. He won it with a backup quarterback in Nick Foles. You could talk about last year, how he won the NFC East and his offense was absolutely all injured, and there were so many injuries last year, and how the cupboard was completely bare, and they were throwing the guys off the practice squad, like Arcega-Whiteside, or he's not a practice squad guy, but there were several guys, like I even forget the wide receivers that the Eagles had last year. I just do. They had Greg Ward from Houston, a former quarterback, and Doug Peterson, for them to actually get their act together and make the playoffs was certainly a good accomplishment. And then they kept it close with Seattle. Then Doug Peterson went into New Orleans, and Doug Peterson's an aggressive play caller. I just think that Doug Peterson, though, over time, his play calling is going to get old. I think that this defense and how they're managing the team, that he's not really. I think that Doug Peterson is not really guiding the Eagles in the best possible direction. So it's tough between Peterson and the other guys on this list. It is certainly tough. But Doug Peterson, an aggressive play caller. Doug Peterson, though, I don't think the Eagles are going to be very successful in the coming years. They just drafted Jalen Hurts. They paid Carson Wentz all that money. And that is why I'm putting Doug Peterson on this list, because his play calling is going to become very, very stale. And Doug Peterson is a guy that has been regressing a little bit. And you could look at Doug Peterson in a couple of years, and you could look at him as maybe a Jim Caldwell, a guy who won a Super Bowl early and then just regressed. Or you could look at him maybe trying to think of a guy like maybe John Harbaugh. You could look at Peterson as that. Wins a Super Bowl, and then the next 7 years are nothing but average mediocrity where the team's barely making the playoffs. So I think the drafting has been absolutely horrible from Doug Peterson. And people then could say, oh, well, that's Howie Roseman's job to be the drafter. No, the head coach and the general manager work in cahoots together to create the plan. So Doug Peterson is number 3 on this list. I like how aggressive Doug Peterson is. The accomplishments with Foles and Wentz. He's made the playoffs every year. And I think in 4 seasons he's won 4 playoff games in 3 seasons, or in 4 seasons, which is a great accomplishment. They won 3 playoff games in 2017. They won 1 playoff game in 2018, and then 2019, which was last year, they lost to Seattle. But again, they did beat the Bears in 2018, had an impressive road victory. So Peterson is a very good coach. I just wouldn't put him up there with this other guy. I would give the slight edge to the number 2 guy on my list, which is Mike McCarthy. Okay, Mike McCarthy won a Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. Mike McCarthy had a lot of success in Green Bay in terms of winning football games. Now, he didn't manage the team very well, so that kind of goes in with Doug Peterson. They never would take opportunities in free agency, and their defense was never really at an all-time high level for Aaron Rodgers. When they lost to the Arizona Cardinals in 2015, they couldn't get a stop in overtime. They needed a Hail Mary to even get to that point in the ball game. In 2016, Aaron Rodgers had a miraculous win over the Dallas Cowboys with the throw to Jared Cook. But then when they went to Atlanta, they didn't have the gas to compete on defense. But Mike McCarthy still has won a Super Bowl. He's won more playoff games than Doug. He has more experience, but he's also invested more time into analytics. And this way away from the game, this year away from the game, is substantially going to help Mike McCarthy in terms of his processing abilities, in terms of how he might call an offense. This year away from the game of football is going to be very valuable in terms of innovative concepts that he's going to come up with. He also has Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb. This Cowboys team is poised to be a very talented football team. You have Jalen Smith, Van Der Esch. I think Robert Quinn is still on that defensive line. The secondary, you have Diggs, and the Cowboys do need some better secondary players than the guys that they have. But the linebacking core again and the pass rush is not bad at all in Dallas. So I look at McCarthy. I like the experience. I like the year off from the game. I think that he's invested time into analytics. I think he's hired a really good coaching staff around him, and he has Kellen Moore. And the Cowboys are going to win the NFC East this year, and the Cowboys are going to have more success in the long run than the Philadelphia Eagles. But number 1 on my list, and people are going to say I'm a Giants homer for this pick, I believe that Joe Judge in the next 5 years is going to play in 2 Super Bowls in the next 5 years. years, and Joe Judge is going to win 2 Super Bowls in the next 5 years. Joe Judge, to me, is the second coming of Tom Coughlin. He's the second coming of Bill Parcells. He's the second coming of Bill Belichick. Joe Judge, over all of these coaches, over McCarthy and over Doug Peterson, he cares about the defensive side of the football. Joe Judge is a guy that manages the entire roster. There's no stone left unturned with Joe Judge. He's the most thorough out of all of these coaches in terms of how he vets draft players. He's the most thorough in terms of players he likes, in terms of schemes, in terms of preference. He is very thorough and very specific. And Joe Judge, in terms of his game planning, Joe Judge is elite in terms of how he game plans for opponents. And Joe Judge, he has a young quarterback in Daniel Jones, a young running back in Saquon Barkley. The offensive line of Andrew Thomas, Matt Pert, Nick Gates, Shane Lemieux. It's a young offensive line. You then combine that with maybe Zeitler and Hernandez that can also contribute. The offensive line is now fixed. You have Evan Ingram. You have a guy in Caden Smith who really overachieved. You have Slayton, Golden Tate in the slot. This is a young team that you can build upon. Defensively, the team is also very young. You have Holmes on that defense. You have the X-Man on that defense. So you also have Dexter Lawrence in the middle of that defense. The Giants with Blake Martinez, with these guys that they've brought in, Joe Judge knows how to build a football team, and Joe Judge is going to win Super Bowl championships because the Giants are building it the right way. They're not splurging in free agency. They're not making rash signings like the Washington Redskins would do. They're not overpaying the quarterback like Seattle is doing, like the Rams are doing, like the Cowboys are going to be doing. They're not overpaying the quarterback so that the Giants have a young quarterback, unlike the Eagles and unlike the Cowboys. Wentz is making too much money. They just signed a Jalen Hurts. Maybe Wentz is retiring. There's a lot of fraction between Carson Wentz and Alshon Jeffrey and Doug Peterson. There is fraction in the Eagles locker room, and I believe Joe Judge and the Giants are going to run this division. Give it 2 years, and then they'll begin. I think the Giants can have a dynasty in the NFC East, and they are going to have a dynasty in the NFC East. They're going to win the NFC East about 5 or 6 times. He's going to be way overhead of Ron Rivera, way past Doug Peterson, and way past Jason Garrett. And the Giants are elite. The Giants fans have waited about maybe 6 or 7 years to finally find an elite level coach. And the Giants went out there. They pick a special teams coach who's 39 years old, who was a wide receiver and special teams coach from the Philadelphia area, who's a 39-year-old complete risk because it's a risk because he's never been a head coach before. So it's a huge, huge risk. But like the Giants, I am comfortable taking this risk in my video that Joe Judge will be the best coach, not only in the NFC East, he's going to be the best coach in all football. He is going to turn into Kyle Shanahan. He's going to turn into what McVay was. So you have to consider who is going to be good in the long term. You have to make predictions. I'm not just going to be here and say, Peterson and McCarthy are clearly 1 and 2 on my list because of past accomplishments. I'm looking towards the unknown. I'm trying to predict what is going to happen in the future, and that is why I make that type of decision. I believe Giants will win 2 Super Bowls in the next 5 years. Again, they have to stay healthy. But again, I have no problem putting that out there and making that prediction. Put it on the clock, Giants. And maybe they'll play in one, lose one. Still, I think 2 Super Bowls will be achieved for the New York Giants in the next 5 years. I think this is the golden age of Giants football, and Giants fans have been through a rough patch for consecutive years. So all of that sacrificing will be made, and all of the sacrifice that the Giants fans have put in will all be put to good use with Joe Judge. He's bringing everybody together. So he is the best coach in the NFC East, and he will be by a long distance and long.